Well, as mandated by Congress in the 2009 stimulus bill, the FCC has released its National Broadband Plan proposal, and now it's Congress's turn to weigh in. Joining us this week on The Communicators are two members who will be very active in the formulation of a national broadband plan. We begin with Rick Boucher, a Democrat of Virginia, who's chairman of the Commerce Subcommittee on Technology. Congressman Boucher, you have publicly praised the plan released by the FCC already. What specifically attracted you to it?
Well, I think there are four areas where the Commission has truly done a superb job. The Commission members and their staffs have evaluated thousands of comments sent to the Commission by interested members of the public. They have charted a true long-range vision for ways that we can deploy broadband more widely and encourage people to adopt it. There are four areas where I think they've done a particularly good job. First, just as we are proposing in legislation that's now pending in our subcommittee, the Commission is proposing a transition of the traditional Universal Service Fund that enables telephone service to be affordable in high-cost rural areas from just the support of basic telephone service to the support of broadband as well, realizing that telephone companies should be offering broadband in these very rural areas. The Commission, very similar to what we're proposing in our legislation, is recommending that the fund be used in the future to support increasingly broadband deployment, and I think that's a superb recommendation. We're seeking, by the way, to place that provision into law in legislation that has already been subjected to a legislative hearing in our subcommittee, and which we hope our subcommittee and the full Committee on Commerce will be approving in the very near future. Secondly, the Commission is targeting the very clear need to have more spectrum made available for commercial wireless services. In the wireless space, we find more and more users as people are going to wireless means of obtaining all of their communications. And also in the wireless space, the applications are becoming more data intensive. Applications that involve some video component, including now full motion video, are becoming far more current. And users are wanting to move to the next level, which is high definition full motion video. And in order to accommodate that, it is going to be necessary to identify additional spectrum that can be made available for commercial wireless services. Legislation that we are now moving through the House of Representatives that was approved last week in our Committee on Commerce would implement this part of the Commission's recommendations. We are directing the FCC, along with the U.S. Department of Commerce, to identify those parts of the wireless spectrum that could be repurposed for commercial uses. We're giving both agencies ample time to conduct a thorough inventory of all uses of the wireless spectrum at the present time, identifying those areas in which spectrum is underutilized and therefore potentially could be repurposed for commercial wireless auctions. We hope to have that bill through the House of Representatives within the course of this month. As a third matter, I had recommended to the FCC some time ago that the broadband plan set a high goal, that we target broadband speeds to the home and to the business that are very similar to what we see in places like South Korea today. And those are broadband speeds of as much as 100 megabits per second. I was pleased to note that the Commission's recommendation targets that level of achievement in terms of data rates. I think that's very important for this network to accommodate the needs that will be prevalent in the future. Those high data rates are going to be important. Now, that will enable things like advanced medical imaging to be sent instantaneously across the internet, and for people to be able to obtain high-definition full motion video as a routine complement to their ordinary internet applications. And then as a fourth matter, the Commission, I think, very appropriately has addressed the needs that we have with regard to ensuring that public safety agencies across the United States, fire, police, and rescue departments located in communities all across our nation, have fully interoperable means of communicating one with the other. We learned in Hurricane Katrina, we learned in 9/11 that when first responders from a variety of different places convene on a central location to provide services, they, in many cases, cannot talk to each other. And that is an oversight that needs to be corrected from the standpoint of promoting public safety nationwide. It's going to take money to do that, and the Commission has recommended a comprehensive approach, which I think is very appropriate for achieving that test. It would involve auctioning what we call the D block. This is a portion of the 700 megahertz spectrum that broadcasters vacated recently in the transition to digital broadcasting. This was the spectrum over which they were broadcasting analog television signals. Most of that was purchased by the wireless carriers. They'll be launching their fourth generation of wireless technology this year and next year using most of that spectrum. But a portion of that 700 megahertz spectrum, which we call the D block, still is in the hands of the federal government. It has not been auctioned, and the Commission is proposing to auction it without condition for purchase at auction. And the proceeds from that would then be devoted to helping to build out the equipment necessary for first responders nationwide to have fully interoperable communications capabilities. It will take some additional funding. The D block revenues by themselves will not be enough to achieve that goal. So some additional revenues are going to be necessary, and the Commission has recommended general appropriations for that. I support that recommendation. I think that as difficult as it is to obtain appropriations these days for new projects, this is an area where we could obtain bipartisan cooperation and a bipartisan commitment to provide the critical funding that is necessary in order to assure that public safety is advanced and that first responders have these vital communications capabilities.
Well, Chairman Boucher, in reading the 350-plus page National Broadband Plan proposal, some specific proposals we'd like to get your comments on relating back to some of the issues that you talked about. Number one of the proposals when it comes to spectrum, the FCC within the next 10 years should free up a new contiguous nationwide ban for unlicensed use. Do you support that?
This is with respect to public safety. Is that your question?
Well, it's to free up. No, this is not in connection with public safety. This is to allow what the Commission says is more innovation and allowing more companies in to an unlicensed area of the spectrum.
Well, we already have set forth a number of new areas where people could provide both licensed and unlicensed uses. I'm thinking particularly of the white spaces, which are the intervals between the broadcast channels that are unused at the present time. And in some places, rural areas in particular, the white spaces constitute large slices of spectrum that are available for wireless internet access. And in some communities, actually one in my district, there's a white space experiment where Wi-Fi is in place at the present time using unlicensed pieces of the white spaces for that purpose. So we have that ahead of us, and that test is proving successful. I think we'll see a nationwide rollout of that in the not too distant future. I have not had an opportunity to review at length the Commission's other recommendations with regard to unlicensed uses. As a practical matter, I certainly support adding to our inventory of unlicensed internet access potential and possibilities, and I think the recommendation certainly is worthy of consideration. We'll have to review it.
Congressman Boucher, Reed Hunt, the former FCC chair, was quoted recently as saying that broadband should and would be the new national common medium. And with respect to the USF, the Universal Service Fund, do you see more funds going towards broadband than they are than currently going towards landlines?
Inevitably, that has to happen. At the present time, the Federal Universal Service Fund can be used only to support traditional telephone service. By law, it is limited just to that use. The high cost fund is $4.5 billion every year. And it is fully subscribed at the present time and is being used by the local exchange carriers in order to support their telephone service offerings. Candidly, they're also using it in order to deploy fiber optics into communities over which they do carry local telephone service, but they're also carrying over that fiber pipe, once it's installed, high-speed internet access, and it becomes a route for their DSL services. So without question, they are today even beginning to make broadband more available through the utilization of universal service funding, although it's generally under the guise of enhancing the capability to offer traditional local telephone service. Our legislation would take two steps in this critical direction. First, we would enable the guise to be removed. We would say that immediately, to the extent that a carrier wants to do so, it can use its federal universal service funds in order to deploy broadband capabilities. Secondly, and very importantly, within a 5-year period after our bill becomes law, the carrier would be required, as a condition of continuing to receive universal service funding, to deploy broadband throughout its service territory. So within a 5-year period, we would see effectively a complete transition from just supporting local telephone service to supporting broadband. At that point in time, virtually all of these carriers are going to be transitioned to the Internet protocol as the means of carrying all of their traffic, telephone service included. So it does not work to the disadvantage of offering basic phone service to have this transition take place. I've been coordinating with the FCC for the past year in extensive conversations with Blair Levin, who at the staff level has headed the broadband plan effort, and also with Chairman Jeninkowski, and sharing some recommendations about key components of the plan. The items that I have discussed to date on this program are items that I had recommended to the Commission, and I'm very pleased to see that the Commission has, in the main, adopted those suggestions as a key part of the plan, and that includes the item that we're just discussing.
Congressman, two final questions. Another recommendation by the FCC. The FCC should consider free or very low-cost wireless broadband as a means to address the affordability barrier to adoption, and they talk about advertising-supported service on this section of the spectrum. Do you agree with that?
I think it has a place. I'm not sure the extent to which the federal government would even be involved in making those decisions. If a commercial provider wanted to offer free services across a network in which it had made investments and then support those services with advertising, that would certainly be within the ambit of what we would expect a private company to do as part of a successful business model. So I think it's a good idea. It will have its place. I'm not sure the federal government has any role in either mandating or supervising that.
And finally, Congressman, should network management or network neutrality be addressed in this plan, and is it?
Well, no, it is not, and frankly, I think it should not be. That's not to say it should not be addressed. We are on a separate track looking at ways that we can assure that the Internet remains open. I'm committed to that. A free and open Internet is essential to the success that the Internet has enjoyed as the biggest platform for commercial innovation and business success that this country's ever seen. We want to keep the openness, the unfettered character of it, the ability of any application provider to access it on equal terms with any other provider, the ability of any user to select any content on the Internet that he wants to access and be free to do it. That has to be preserved. We are talking to the broadband providers. We're talking to the companies that rely upon the Internet as a means of transporting their product to their customers, and we're working toward a set of understandings that hopefully we can embody in statute in the not-too-distant future that will help us achieve that goal.
Who will be testifying at the March 25th hearing?
The March 25th hearing, that's next week, is being held with the 5 commissioners of the Federal Communications Commission as witnesses. Their purpose there will be to talk about the National Broadband Plan and to answer some of the questions that you've posed here this morning, which I'm sure members of our committee will pose, as well as other questions.
Congressman Rick Boucher is chairman of the Commerce Subcommittee on Technology. Thank you for being on the Communicators.
Thank you very much.
Up next, the top Republican on the Commerce Subcommittee. And now joining us is Cliff Stearns, a Republican of Florida, who is the ranking member on the Commerce Subcommittee on Technology. Congressman Stearns, after the federal FCC broadband plan proposal was released, you sent out a press release, and this is what you said. We'd like to get you to expand on this if you would. I am concerned that the plan may contain stalking horses for investment-killing ideas, such as so-called net neutrality mandates or a return to outdated monopoly-era regulation.
Well, Peter, this plan, as you can see here, I thought I'd bring the plan along so that everybody could see it. It's a pretty significant document. And Peter, it's got a lot of worthwhile things in it. I think a lot of the people who believe that the way to get omnipresent broadband in America is through the free market and not through government regulation. I was just, Peter, going ahead and saying, now, wait a second here. Be careful that you have a lot of mandates in this plan which would cause, shall we say, the people who are putting down the fiber optics to hold off and not expend the capital. And so I was listing two things that concerned me. One was changing the jurisdiction of the FCC on the internet from Title I, which is really gets them into just the wires and connection. But if they put it into Title II, then they would have the jurisdiction on content, which a little worries me. That was one of my concerns. And the other was a term called net neutrality, which I call net regulation, which is if you are going peer-to-peer and you're downloading a lot of information, right now the internet providers can manage that. But under net neutrality, the government step in and say, oh no, you can't do that. And so just like at a traffic jam, you'd have no alternative but just to have the government saying you can't be involved at all. And so in a way, it's disrupting the internet. So all I did, Peter, was bring forth a couple ideas that I had, put them out there. I have to be honest with you, there is not in this national broadband plan that's provided a lot talking about that, which is good news. So I think I'm sort of relieved.
We just spoke with Chairman Boucher, and one of the issues that he raised was the Universal Service Fund. And he says that it will probably be necessary that USF funds go toward broadband deployment rather than landline telephones. Do you agree with that?
I do. In fact, the plan here talks about reforming the Universal Service Fund. And all of us know that when we started with telephones, a lot of the rural parts of the United States couldn't get telephones, so that there was a tax on everybody to help provide at expense of the government to give back money to people to provide telephones for the rural part of this country. So now the question is, do we need to change that? And I think we do. We need to really, shall we say, freeze the cost for universal service funds for telephones and to concentrate on broadband. Now, to get broadband omnipresent, I'm not sure that the way we're going is the best way. Now, Peter, the report, this plan that came out, says that 95% of the households in America have access to broadband. And 2/3 of those have high speed. 1/3 decided not to have it, but they have access. So we're down to about 7 million people in this country that don't have it. So the question is, how do we get those people? I don't think we have to spend a lot of government money to go across the other people who have it, but go to the people that are unserved. And as you know, the stimulus package had $7.2 billion to spend to help people get broadband. Well, when you think about it, that's a lot of money to help those 7 million people that don't have it. Well, it turns out they're starting to give contracts out to underserved areas rather than people that are unserved, and there's a distinction there. So I think the combination of the stimulus package is $7.2 billion, and the goals within here that the Boucher, Chairman Boucher mentioned, and I agree with, we need reform of the Universal Service Fund.
Congressman Stearns, one of the issues that has been talked about when it comes to broadband is competition. In your view, does this plan lend itself to competition?
I think it does, in the sense that it gives goals. You know, the plan says they want, across America, they want to have 100 megabytes for downloading and 50 megabytes for uploading. So that's a goal that I think can be achieved, and some countries are going to do it. Then further on in the plan, they talk about 1 gigabyte broadband. Now that's a quantum step upward, but I think that's a goal, that's good. But the question is, can you get that through government funding, through government mandate, through government participation, or can you get it through the natural market? The market, of course, wants to sell broadband at higher speed. And I saw that the local cable companies are now advertising 100 megabytes broadband, and so it was just yesterday. In fact, most cable companies only have 5 megabytes. So I think the market's going to move there. I'm not sure that government needs to regulate too much to do it. So, but I think the goals of the plan are good.
One of the recommendations in the National Broadband Plan proposal, the FCC should consider free or very low-cost wireless broadband as a means to address the affordability barrier to adoption. Do you agree with that?
Well, again, we're moving back to, the government stepping in and guaranteeing for all Americans broadband and having it subsidized by taxpayers. Now, you didn't see the government step in to subsidize the iPhone. We have the new iPad that's coming out, and orders are going for that. Now the iPod, everybody's got an iPod today, and the reason is the price keeps coming down. So I think the government has to figure out a way to do this so that the price of these for broadband comes down, and the government comes in and subsidizes and taxes it is not necessarily going to bring it down. So I would say I have sort of mixed reaction to what your statement is, Peter, because I think in the end, if we allow the market to work, the cost of broadband will come down, just like the cost of computers. The amount of memory on these computers is going up exponentially, and the cost has come down almost exponentially. So this can happen in broadband, and you just got to be careful the government doesn't step in with mandates.
Another recommendation, to accelerate broadband deployment, Congress should consider providing optional public funding to the Connect America Fund, such as a few $billion per year over a 2 or 3 year period.
Well, I think some of these programs they're talking about, I have mixed reaction about. I think when they talk about taking and providing more spectrum for wireless, that's a good idea. Selling off the D block, allow people to have more and more spectrum and get this off of the government and auction it off, which will create the allowability of more speeds for fourth generation wireless. And what they're doing here, remember, if they allocate any money, it's got to come from somewhere, and particularly with this huge deficit we have, and the president talking about a freeze in discretionary spending, although small, shows that the problem is that we got to be careful if we allocate more money for things that the taxpayer is going to have to pay for.
While the commission was developing the plan, were you in pretty close touch with them?
Well, not really. It went down a little bit on partisan lines. I think the 2 Republican commissioners were told about it, but they were not involved with the actual development. As you know, a lot of people came from outside of Congress, outside of the FCC, were hired, and I've asked how much money did they spend and who these people were. There's no transparency that I know of that has pointed out these are the people that were hired to develop this plan. How much money did you spend? And I don't think the 2 Republican commissioners know that. So I've actually written a letter to Janikowski, the chairman, asking these same questions because, here in Congress, lots of times there's hidden agenda. Unless you know who the participants were and what they were paid, you really don't know. Perhaps there could be a conflict of interest. So my concern is I like to see lots of transparency. When you develop a plan, a national broadband plan for the country, you should have transparency.
And in fact, that letter was sent on March 12th, your
true.
letter.
That's
and you
true.
also ask, why was it necessary to delay the plan to March 17th from February 17th? Have you gotten an answer from Chairman Janikowski on that?
No, in all fairness to him, he probably needs some time to answer this letter. I think we've told him March 22nd, but I think he's going to be before the Telecommunications and Internet Subcommittee very soon. And so I'll be able to ask him directly if he intends to answer my letter, and perhaps I can ask him to also answer some of the questions that were in the letter, namely, why did he delay it, how much did it cost, and who are these people that developed the plan, and tell the American taxpayers who are paying for this who they are.
Congressman Stearns, throughout several interviews on the communicators, we've heard about the spectrum, and Chairman Janikowski has told us that there's a coming shortage of spectrum, and we talked with Marty Cooper, the founder of the cell phone, who said that there's not a shortage of spectrum, but it needs to be used more efficiently. Where do you stand on the issue of spectrum and how to develop more or find more space?
Well, I think Marty's absolutely correct. There is enough spectrum. I think there is. Obviously, the D block, some of these the spectrum we can start auctioning off. There's some talk about the spectrum given to the broadcasters. The broadcasters, as you know, went from analog to digital. When they went to digital, they picked up a whole lot of new channels that they can use. If the FCC wants to do that, they certainly should reimburse them. But there are, I think, other ways to do this. But I think if we use the spectrum more efficiently, I think that's one of the first steps that all of us agree upon.
Congressman Cliff Stearns is the ranking member on the Commerce Subcommittee on Technology. He's joining us this week on the Communicators. We spoke with Rick Boucher, the chairman, just a few minutes ago. By the way, if you'd like to read the National Broadband Plan, it's 350 plus pages. You can go to cspan.org/communicators. The site from the FCC has been hyperlinked at that space. What else did you disagree with in the plan, Congressman Stearns, that we haven't discussed?
Well, I think we've covered it. There is one area that I'm a little concerned about, which is sort of a business model. If you go out and you lay down the fiber optics and you make the investment and you own it, there's some talk about unbundling. And what this would mean is that companies that own the fiber optics, invest in the fiber optics, and sell the fiber optics to their customers, they might have to be separated into 3 separate companies. This unbundling would create, I think, a lot of angst in the market, and I think we got to be careful. If these people are willing to go out and raise the capital and do it, I think the FCC's got to be careful with this idea of unbundling, which would mean that a corporation, after they spent all the money, made the investment, and were selling and were successful, suddenly they had to rip up their corporation into 3 segments because of the government. So that's one area that I'm a little concerned about. And as I've mentioned some of the others, I think these are things that we have to be cautious about more than anything. I think the goals of this broadband plan are excellent, and it's very interesting reading. I hope a lot of the citizens of this country will take time, because the productivity in America is going to come from this type of deployment. Broadband, 4th generation wireless, high definition television, these 3 together are going to increase productivity in America. And we have all the proprietary information here in this country, so that we'll be on the vanguard of this development. And so it's nothing but good news for this country. We just got to make sure that the government doesn't get in the way and stop its deployment.
What would be the purpose of that unbundling that you spoke of?
Well, what happens is they feel that some people have too much power and they control the cost, and it could be a monopoly. And so, as you know, Microsoft was under the Justice Department purview because they felt that they should be unbundled. There's other corporations that like that. But sometimes these corporations who make these investments are doing it very efficiently, and other corporations can do the same thing. So the question would be, when you unbundle, are you breaking it up for monopoly reasons, or are you breaking it up because the company is too competitive and is giving us something at a low price? So in some cases, you don't want to take a corporation who's doing a good job and keeping the price low and ask them to break themselves up, because then they become more efficient, and then in the end, the consumers will not get the advantages. So it's a very, shall we say, it has to be well balanced, I guess you would say.
Congressman Stearns, does this plan, in your view, lend itself to innovation and entry into the telecommunications market by smaller companies?
Well, I have to tell you, I haven't read the whole plan, but the portions I've read, I think, have stimulated in America the idea that we can get 1 gigahertz speeds on broadband. Right now, the cable, as I said, is 5 megabytes. And my cell phone, my BlackBerry or Trio or the iPod, iPhone, they would be just slow compared to 1 gigabyte. And this would mean you would download DVDs in seconds. When you add on to that holograms, and you add on to that all the apps that are coming out, it's going to be a revolution at those speeds at 1 gigabyte. So I think the plan is good, because it's saying, America, focus on broadband, make it omnipresent, and make sure that all the government, the institution, the schools, and the colleges all have it. And that'll be a long leap to make America preeminent in technology.
Congressman Cliff Stearns, ranking member on the Commerce Subcommittee on Technology. Thank you for being on the Communicators.
Peter, thanks for having me.
And again, if you'd like to read the National Broadband Plan proposal as proposed by the FCC, cspan.org/thecommunicators.
The Senate